Hello everybody, and welcome to another video about the grim dark future in Cyberpunk 2077. Now, this is a video that has kind of crossed my mind multiple times because I think this is an interesting information here that a lot of you who probably haven't researched into the game at all would never have expected to be part of this, or at least you might not know the extent of it. So, how about I share with you some of these stuff that has both either been confirmed to be in Cyberpunk 2077, or it simply exists in the universe from the tabletop RPG, and you should probably expect to hear something or see something about this all. So why don't we dive in and explore around a little bit more, because this is fascinating stuff. Now, the first thing on our list is exotics. Now, you might be thinking, am I talking about a car? Am I talking about a type of people, or what? Well, how about this? I'm talking about what is more or less furries in the Cyberpunk universe, and even beyond that, fantasy. What kind of fantasy? Ogres, orcs, elves. Now, you might be going, whoa, what are you talking about? Explain yourself. How can that possibly exist? Well, let me read to you what exactly is an exotic. Where do they come from? Exotics are a form of fashion and biosculpting, which creates physical forms that range from animal-like in appearance to something that may look entirely inhuman. Body sculpt jobs that emphasize the alien or inhuman looks are known as exotics. Vat-grown tails, furred skins, hooves, animal-like faces and ears, cat eyes, and other semi-human features that are highlights of this style. Exotic fashion is incredibly expensive, time-consuming, and usually a hobby among only the rich and very bored. Prices are based on individual enhancements. So let that sink in for a moment. You could see something minor, quote-unquote, and what is considered minor? There's people who will do things like, hey, I want cat ears, whiskers, a cat fur pattern on me, and like cat claws, or hey, I want mouse ears on me and a mouse tail. And then you pick up into something a little more on the playful side of things, where hey, here's a picture of a rocker girl, or well, rocker boy, with bunny ears, a whisker, even the teeth and a little tail. And then on the flip side, you got a snake lady who pretty much had her nose removed and got a more serpentine face structure. And all of this is considered minor. And let's not forget, I also brought up fantasy. Yes, that includes elves, dwarves and halflings, and trolls and ogres, and orcs and goblins. That's pretty wild. I'm guessing this is rich people who really enjoyed D&D, more or less. And then you get into the major exotic packages, like full-blown body overhauls, where we see a person that's essentially turned themselves into a bear. A massive, hulking bear. And keep an eye on the fact that a lot of these are still augmentations and enhancements to the body. Who knows how many cybernetics are involved in this. Notice how it says major facial modifications, a short muzzle, natural fangs, but retractable claws, fur skin change, and grafted muscle. And then you move on to a Superman look. A person who is essentially wanting to, as it's saying, be a Superman, a superhuman, the Ubermensch, the future of humanity, quote-unquote. Essentially a certain type of perfect being. Almost kind of like the Greek, statues of that perfect body that some imagine. And then you've got, hey, hold on, tiger. Essentially turning yourself into a giant tiger man. And then when you go on, look at this. There is a Bugman alteration. Let that sink in. That's, I think out of all of them, this one is the most wild. And then, yeah, you have Shark Man, which, from what I understand, that one's actually pretty dang popular. And it just goes on and on. Right here in this picture, you essentially have a canine cop. Now that, I could see some uses for that. That seems pretty cool. And there at the bottom, a Dragon Man. That is just wild. And it does go on to a final being, note of play being to where, well, erotic exotic is putting it lightly. So you can see where that leads, more or less. But yeah, just let that sink in for a moment, that this is something that exists in the Cyberpunk universe. And I do believe it was confirmed that we will see at least a few exotics in the game. I'm sure it'll be a rare occasion, probably more like a side quest type thing that you run into on the street. You find someone maybe in the back alley, or you get a hidden call from an unknown client wanting you to take care of something, and when you go and meet them, you're in for a surprise of, who knows, Tiger Man, Cat Lady, Dog Man, whatever. I'm fully expecting to see a few encounters with them in-game. You probably can't turn yourself into one, I'm sure. At most, maybe you can change your eyeball's iris, if even that. And I don't think I'd really count on an expansion or the multiplayer allowing this. But it is a fascinating note, and something that, hey, look out for this, more or less. So bear that in mind. Cyberpunk is about changing who you are into whatever you want, more or less. Transcending humanity into something else. And this biosculpting extends beyond just this exotic stuff. You really might see some of this in-game. And by that I mean turning yourself into a quote-unquote Barbie or Ken body style. You know, trying to make yourself like the perfect superstar image, or the perfect model, basically. So that's something to bear in mind. It's not all, just augmenting yourself up with robotic arms and legs and limbs. No, Cyberpunk's body alterations do extend into the actual physical body parts and limbs. It's not always, I can slash everything off. No, you could, hypothetically, if you lost a limb, you could go to a body bank, or whatever they call them, and get a new actual human arm instead of a augmentation to replace you. That's just how it works in that universe, so that's something cool right there to keep in mind. Next up is space exploration. Now, what is the state of space exploration in Cyberpunk? Well, it's apparently made some pretty considerable progress. By the year 2025, in the expansion modules for Cyberpunk of Deep Space and I think Near Orbit, they've actually made a lot of progress. To my understanding, this module is just jam-packed, talking about fighters and shuttles, landing craft, their space stations, their colonies, everything from how the civilian life goes to how war is fought in space. It is amazing to read just the sheer amount of science and research that went into this. All the combat, the lore behind the corporations that are involved with it, and just what sort of life it is. It's very cool stuff to see that it's gone this far, and it has to make you wonder, in 50 years, how far did this technology go from 2025 to 2077? It does make you wonder if there's any chance for you to be able to see some of this, or participate in it in any way, shape, or form in the video game. And to my understanding, the moon is thoroughly colonized in Cyberpunk, and they are working hard at making efforts to colonize Mars as well during this time frame of 2025. And they have a understanding and send many missions out to all the other planets to try and, grasp if it's, what can they get out of it? What sort of materials can they do? What sort of work can they make out of there? Just what can come out of working on each of these planets, basically. So if space fascinates you, then this is right up your alley, because it talks about all the science behind this and how it works in combat. It's really cool, really neat, I'm excited to see how space would potentially come up with the video game. So, following in the footsteps of that, what comes next? Well, how about gangs? And not just any gangs, not what you just saw in the videos from Night City Wire on like Valentinos and the 6th Street Boys and all that. No, I'm talking poser gangs. Now you might be scratching your head at that. Well, posers are a subculture from the Cyberpunk 2013 and 2020 books. And these are people who try to impersonate celebrities or fictional characters, even to the point of being biosculpted, like I mentioned earlier with exotics, to resemble them. And it gets crazy just what sort of poser gangs and some of these just other wild gangs that exist in the Cyberpunk universe. Mike Pondsmith has once said that one of his favorite gangs in all of Cyberpunk is the Bozos gang. Now, the Bozos gang is a very, very violent and sadistic prankster gang. And essentially what it is killer, crazy, psychotic clowns. And it's a little darker than that, because a lot of these guys are people who have gone into cyberpsychosis, just cyberpsychotic, thirst for blood, completely insane, mentally unstable. And their bodies are not just costumes. These are people who have biosculpted their bodies into being clowns. We're talking the full nose, they oversize their big feet to match those crazy big silly shoes that you see on a clown. And they just get off on torture, murder, just terrorizing people completely and thoroughly. And it doesn't just stop there, no. When I'm talking poser gangs and the whole popular subculture, I'm talking there are literal gangs in Cyberpunk of Trekkies, Coneheads, the Elvises, and one of my favorites from a little campaign that Mike Pondsmith did with IGN called The Gilligans. So yes, I do mean that there is indeed a gang of Star Trek fans, where they have literally turned themselves into characters like Spock and Captain Picard, Wesley's, Kirk's, McCoy's, Scotty's, you name it. And this is generally a well-behaved gang, apparently, but they will indeed fight if they have to, and they're really, really high-tech. And then you move on to the Coneheads, and here's the only entry on these. A violent poser gang which affects the appearance of the old Saturday Night Live Coneheads. Their weapons are adorned with fins, little antennae, giving them a comic science fiction appearance. Coneheads speak in a robotic manner. And like I said with the Elvises, a gang that is literally kind of like the Kings in Fallout New Vegas. These guys have made themselves into Elvis's image, and they praise and worship the king. They have literally taken over Graceland by force in 2008 and have occupied that ever since, and have spread all throughout the world. That's some crazy stuff right there. And also what I mentioned earlier with the Gilligans is a militant gay poser gang now based in the park after being pushed out of the marina by the Wild Things. They are based on the TV sitcom of the same name. Skippers are the leader, professors are the techs, Gilligans are the initiates, and Gingers and Mariannes are transsexuals. So, wow. And if you want to see that gang in action again, I recommend checking out IGN's little Cyberpunk session with Mike Pondsmith, the man himself, the creator of Cyberpunk. It is really funny getting to see how the Gilligans came into play there. I recommend giving that a listen to. There's definitely a lot of laughs in that one. But yeah, it's hard to say if we're gonna see any of these in Cyberpunk 2077. I'm gonna be genuinely shocked if there really is no appearance of the Bozos, with how much Mike Pondsmith loves them and how he always comments that that's one of his favorite gangs in the universe. I think it'd be crazy that with as heavily involved as he is with the game, if they did not appear somehow, or some of these other gangs maybe. I know that there's definitely a fine line to tread with, you know, copyright. So we'll just have to see what happens, because man, this even extends beyond this with, like, I think there's supposed to be a Michael Jackson poser gang in Cyberpunk, and I think even a gang for making yourself like John F. Kennedy. So, it's wild stuff, but hey, it's pretty interesting to know, I think, personally, and we'll see how these maybe crazier, wild, or just outright bizarre gangs might come into play in Cyberpunk. Next up, cyber weapons. Now, you probably already know about some of these. I mean, we've seen the Mantis blades, we've seen like the Gorilla arms, or the N-arm grenade launcher, or the monofilament wire in your arm. What about some of these other ones, though, in the Cyberpunk lore? Like, talk about the Rippers, or the Wolvers, or the Vampires, or the Cyber Snake. Now, I'll go into some of these with, here's what the vampires are. Implanted fangs, usually made of harboglass or superchromed metal. You can have a full set implemented, called the Shark Grin Special, or canines only, and these are considered to be decorative, not black market cyberware, and can be purchased in any local clinic. Vampires can be augmented with poison injectors for double the normal price. And to my understanding, Cyberpunk did in fact have like a sort of a parallel universe or alternate universe expansion where it was like creatures of the night, vampires and werewolves existed, monsters of the night. This expansion, known as Night's Edge, is not exactly canon, but as far as I'm aware, it is something that Artalsorian Games did officially put out for Cyberpunk, so it's definitely in an interesting place, and I do think that this universe would be ripe for such a thing. But again, this is just an augment that we're talking about. This whole vampire stuff, that's alternate universe. This augmentation is only known as vampires. And then I mentioned Rippers. The best way I can basically describe this, to put it bluntly, is imagine your fingernails extended out into massive claws. Massive, like foot-long claws that can just shred things to bits. And a lot of people hide these Rippers by just putting fake fingernails over them. So that's a very interesting and very deadly augment right there, just by the sound of it. And then next up I mentioned Wolvers. They are the longest and deadliest of the implanted blades. Wolvers are implanted along the back of the hand. When the hand is clenched into a fist, the thin, triangular blades telescope and lock into place, remaining extended a full foot until the hand is relaxed. And you know, that sounds like a very, very scary and deadly type of blade right there. For those of you who don't know, triangular blades were a type of knife during, I believe, World War I, and those got banned by the Geneva Convention because of how horrible the wounds that they would leave were. Trying to patch up a wound from a triangular blade is apparently a nightmare, and I think it's understandable why. So that sounds like a very illegal augment right there, if you ask me. And then lastly, this is the one I think is most interesting, the Cyber Snake. The most blunt way I could put it to you is, it's described as a semi-autonomous metal tentacle that attaches to the body in various ways and is able to be stacked for multiple tentacle attacks. So just imagine you're talking to someone and essentially they got this giant metal wire that could just come out and probably impale you, for example, out of nowhere. It's kind of a creepy thought, but I think it's really cool. All of these are augments, and I'm like, I don't know if we would be able to see any of these in-game. Maybe these are ones that we would see but not be able to get, or they would come in an expansion in the future, because remember, Cyberpunk 2077 is getting essentially 2 major DLCs, even bigger than The Witcher's expansions. So it's almost probably going to be like 2 entirely new games. So it'll be pretty cool to see where this sort of stuff leads, or get into a fight with somebody using any of these. I'm looking forward to it. And speaking of Snake, that actually does happen to lead us into our final topic. Animals in the Cyberpunk universe have grown very, very scarce. In fact, many are extinct outright. And most of the animals that you would see in Cyberpunk's universe are Flash clones or mecha. essentially. Now, let me read to you a post that more or less describes what exactly happened to animals. In cyberpunk lore, well before 2077, animal life in general had already started by outright going extinct. By 2008, the last legitimate organic bird died. By 2020s, it was increasingly uncommon to see anything but cybernetic or cloned dogs and cats owned by the wealthy and Night City elite. If your pockets are deep enough, you can have virtually any animal you can think of created out of cybernetic components, or have genetically cloned animal, much more expensive and much less variety in terms of exotic and rare animals. But we have to remember that Night City is a place where much of its population lives in poverty and squalor. So beyond rich corporate employees and criminals, it'd be immensely rare to see pet animals of any kind for most inhabitants of the city. You absolutely wouldn't see anything like birds flying around, or rats rummaging through garbage, etc. Outside the city, I wouldn't expect to see any wildlife at all, as the entire landscape is completely droughted out by 2077. From what small amount of lore we've been able to access between the 2020 timeline and 2077-2 timeline, it only appears the world has gotten darker and worse in this regard as time went on. So I'd expect animals in the 2077 Night City to be damn near non-existent. And that was a post by a user known as Locktrawl on Reddit. And it's a very good summary, it's a perfect summary really, of just what is the state of wildlife and animals in 2077. They have just essentially been killed off or died off, more or less to whatever crap humanity has been up to in this time frame. And now there's barely anything left, and what you do see is more than likely not a real biological animal. And if it is, then it's more than likely cloned, if anything. So that's a pretty dark note, and who knows if we really will see any animals in Cyberpunk's universe here in the 2077. My guess is maybe you'll see a cat or dog by a rich person, or who knows, you run into some really high-level fixer rich fella, and he's got like a mechanical tiger or lion, and I feel like that's pretty much the extent of it. It's a depressing thought, but hey, this is the state of this dark universe in the world of Cyberpunk. It pretty much fits in line with the themes of this genre perfectly, so that pretty much wraps up everything for this video. That's 5 crazy, strange, or very intriguing facts about the Cyberpunk 2020 to 2077 universe. And hey, the countdown is moving along. It's not much longer now before the video game actually will indeed drop. And in that time frame, I'm going to try and squeeze out another review. I'm going to also try and do the other Night City Wire reactions, and yeah, just see what else can fit in by then. So with all that said and done, thank you very much for watching and listening. I hope this gave you some interesting info, and maybe something to try and seek out in the actual game when it drops, or maybe hope for in the DLC. Who knows? November 19th, everyone. And the information that you heard in this video, much of it came from the world of Cyberpunk, the Cyberpunk wiki, and some of the Cyberpunk 2020 module books. So if you'd like to learn more, I recommend checking out those sources. And with that, thank you, see you next time.
There is no time to celebrate. Reset that clock!